Okay, talking about some supraventricular tachycardias. So first of all, look at the Qrs complex. Qrs complex is shown right here. That's the Q, that's the R, this is the S right here, the whole width. If it's less than 120 milliseconds, which is the same as, remember you got the big box on the time thing here, and you've got 5 small boxes. Each one of these little boxes is 0.04 seconds. So if you get 3 of those, 0.04 plus 0.04 plus 0.04 is going to be 0.12, and that's the same thing as 120 milliseconds, because you convert it to milli. So 120 milliseconds, if it's less than 120 milliseconds, then you're looking at supraventricular tachycardia, meaning that if this is a diagram of the heart, here is the SA node, the AV node. It means that up here above the ventricles, or above the, excuse me, so exactly here above the ventricles, you have a rhythm that's coming down through the heart and making the heart beat fast, a tachycardia, heart beating fast. So the first thing you're going to look at here is it irregularly irregular? And that sounds really odd, but basically what irregular means is it does it look normal or abnormal? That's the main first question. So you have to know what normal looks like. So first of all, this irregular versus regular part, the second part of the word, right here. So does it look normal? And you say, well, no, it's fast, whatever. So then you say, what about, is it irregularly irregular? So we already know it's beating fast. But what this means is if you look at each little complex, Q, R, S, and then you get a certain space, the Q, R, S, I'm leaving out P waves and T waves. That's okay. And then Q, R, S. And you look at the space between each one of these guys right here, the R waves on the top. Are they happening about the same time? Same interval of time. If they're happening about the same interval of time, then that would be regularly irregular. But if it's like, QRS, 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 oh, weird, this one's close together, over here this one's far apart, you'd call that irregularly irregular. Okay, so it's irregular because it's going fast, but it's happening in like an unpredictable way. And if this is the case, then you think, oh, the person must either have atrial fibrillation or multifocal atrial tachycardia. So what's the difference between atrial fibrillation versus multifocal tachycardia? Well, usually when you look at atrial fibrillation, see this little guy right here is like atrial, the little A wave. Excuse me, it's the P wave, but it's atrial fibrillation. So normally in a rhythm, you're going to see this little like wave that's going to fire prior to each complex. So it's going to go like this: P wave, and then Q, R, S, and then you're going to get like a T wave somewhere in there, and then you're going to get a P wave, and anyway, so it's going to continue like that. And so this little P wave here, in the case of atrial fibrillation, is it's not really going to fire. It's going to kind of like wiggle around, and then you're going to have like a ventricular tachycardia, or QRS wave, and then it's going to like wiggle around a little bit, and then you'll have like another one, and then it's not going to be a predictable rate, so it might happen a little later, and it's just totally kind of like, look it up, AFib. You can see pictures of it. Excuse me. And whereas in the case of multifocal atrial tachycardia, you see that there are 3 different morphologies. So if you can see, there's actually some sort of pattern to when the atria fire. So for example, if the spaces between the atrial firing follow some kind of pattern, like a pattern of 3 different morphologies, then you see, oh, then it must be multifocal atrial tachycardia. It's kind of hard to draw out, but I guess you can look up here more details on it. So next, the regular or regularly irregular. So this is an instance where, yeah, this is this is irregular, like maybe it's fast or something like that, but it's it's irregular in a regular way, meaning that you can kind of predict when, the R to R intervals are going to be at a certain space, all the way through whatever. So if that's what's happening, then you need to look at the P waves. So remember, the little P wave should be the little bump prior to this. In this case, the P wave here, that's before the QRS complex. The P wave usually fires, and that's the atria, going off, and then the QRS complex goes off over here, and that's the ventricles going off. And that usually happens, first the atria, then the ventricles, and that's good. But if you look at this and you find that that as you're going through this, you've got the ventricles contracting, and then the P wave occurs here, like right afterwards, and then there's this long space between the P wave and the R wave of the QRS complex, and then there's a really short space between the R interval and the P wave again. So basically, it goes R wave, really short space, and then a P wave. They call that a short RP interval. Whereas if you see that the R wave goes off, and then you have this long space, and then the P wave goes off, they call that a long RP. So when you've assessed that, you actually can narrow it down based on there being a short RP or long RP, what the cause of this is. So if it is a short RP, as shown here, meaning that the R to R ratio, it's less than 1/2 the R to R ratio. So remember that the RP is the space from the R interval to another P wave. You see this is long. You go over here and you see that the R wave before the P wave here is very short. So if you have that, you have the AVNRT. I believe that stands for Atrial Ventricular Nodal Reentrant Tachycardia, I believe. Or you have the AVRT, which is the Atrioventricular Reentry Tachycardia. Hopefully I'm getting the acronym for that correct. And then over here you have atrial tachycardia, meaning the atria are firing too fast. That's one of the things that can happen. Another thing that can happen, if it is regularly irregular, then you can say it might be atrial flutter. And the main difference between atrial flutter and AFib, one thing they say, oh, it has this sawtooth pattern, it looks a certain way, whatever. But not like that. But the real determinant here is going to be the R to R ratio. So you go from R to R, and if that ratio is the same, each R hitting about the same point, then the person, but you see, that the it is, it's firing fast, but it has this really predictable same RR, then you could say this is atrial flutter. But however, going over here, I already talked about this one. We covered these two. We covered that one. The last thing I haven't covered is this long RP, where the RP is, bigger than half of the R to R ratio. So this guy right here, you see this instance where it goes R wave, and then there's big piece of big time here, and then a P wave fires. Then you're going to say, okay, this person must just have atrial tachycardia, or maybe an atypical AVNRT. And that's kind of an overview explanation of how this works.